Win percent by knockout, win percent by
Hello everyone, my name is Trixster, and I published a video about a month ago finding the most average UFC fighter of all time in terms of stats. If you haven't seen it, I won't spoil who it is, but I definitely recommend going to check it out before you watch this video. It'll probably make things I talk about in this video make a bit more sense. But as I've asked you guys in the title, who is the most average UFC champion of all time? I know I haven't uploaded in about a month. The winter month got a bit busy with the holidays and stuff, but I'm back. I've been making updates to things like the ELO system, I swear, as well as a new ELO system for something else, and I'll get to that one in another video, just ignore that for now. I plan to get back to a regular schedule for uploading, talking about the major UFC events, my predictions, the ELOs, maybe some gaming, I don't know, just all, I'm planning, I have big plans for 2025, just stay tuned. I want to thank you guys for all the continued support, and yeah, I appreciate all you guys. Once again, I also want to shout out, you guessed it, Mr. V's Garage. This was obviously inspired by the big man, so just big thank yous all around. So, as you all know from the last video, which you guys obviously watched of course, I have a complete data set of every UFC fighter with so many statistical categories. From that, I narrowed it down to 14 categories, which I believe are the most important when determining who is the most average. Those 14 categories being shown on the screen now. Across these categories, plus one more bonus category added for the fun of this video, we can rank each champion in each category and see who ranks the most consistently average across all of the categories, and then determine that is our most average UFC champion of all time. I do have some stipulations, by the way. So once again, we're only going to be looking at the male UFC data. So there have been 84 champions across the UFC's history in these 8 different weight classes for men. I will not be including interim champions except Tom Aspinall. If you have to defend the damn interim belt, then, well, you're a champion in my eyes, and I think the real ones will agree with that decision. And one more thing to note, as you guys watch along, maybe try to guess and leave a comment if you think you know which champion leads a certain category, or on the other end, which champion is at the bottom of that category. Just, all of that helps the engagement of this video. So, make sure to like it, subscribe, and yeah, just leave some comments if you think you know. With that recap out of the way though, I suppose we can get right into the numbers. It should be no surprise that champions have a much longer career than just your everyday UFC fighter. This is easily shown with the average number of wins across UFC champions, which is 23. 10 more than the average number of wins across all male UFC fighters. The champion with the most wins is 2-time welterweight champion Matt Hughes with 46. And you might have been able to guess the least amount of wins, with that being Brock Lesnar at only 6. The average number of losses across UFC champions is 7, only 2 more than the average number of losses across all fighters at 5, and I suppose that makes sense. The number isn't significantly more like the wins category because, well, they're champions, they're not supposed to lose. There are 2 undefeated champions in UFC history, with Khabib and Ilia Topuria currently. Khabib, of course, keeping a 0 because he's retired, and we still have to see for the rest of Ilya's career, but who knows? Maybe he could surprise a lot of people and keep that 0. The champ with the most losses goes to Andrei Arlovsky, who also holds the most losses across all fighters in UFC history, but of course you knew that, you watched the previous video. The average number of draws is 0, which is the same as the average number of draws for all fighters. 2 draws was actually the most across all champions, but there have been several champions to reach 2 draws, and I'll put them all up on the screen right now. Still keeping things relatively simple, the average weight across champions lies in middleweight, with the most number of champions across UFC history being in heavyweight, where there have been 24 champs, including Tom Aspinall. On average, UFC champions win 32% of their UFC fights by knockout, 14% by submission, and 22% by decision. As with our most average fighter, these numbers are calculated separately for each type of wins. They don't add up to 100%. But for each fighter, they will add up to 100%, if that sort of makes sense. Okay, and with the more basic categories out of the way, let's move on to more numbery things. And I think this is where the guessing gets pretty fun, and I'll keep the categories on the screen so you guys can, guess and leave your comments and stuff. The average number of significant strikes landed in a champion's career is 861.91, with the average number of significant strikes attempted in a champion's career being 1,814.4. As in my previous video, so of course you already know this, Max Holloway once again has the most landed significant strikes landed in a career, and also most attempted. I'm seeing a trend now though. The champions tend to carry a lot of these types of records. Tom Aspinall holds the most significant strikes landed per minute at 8.02, while the average lies at 3.75. The least amount of significant strikes landed per minute across champions is at 0.62, and that goes to a guy named Carlos Newton. He had a very short-lived title reign, but I mean, yeah, he was a big-time jiu-jitsu guy, so I guess that checks out. Of course, with every champion who can land well, there's a champion who gets hit the most, with significant strikes absorbed per minute. I got it right that time. I swear, guys. I saw the comments on the last one. The champ who gets hit the most is Yuri Prohaska, with his own average of absorbing 5.59 strikes per minute. I wasn't expecting to see Yuri's name here, but bro style low-key makes him a human punching bag, so I mean, I guess that's why he absorbs the most strikes out of all of our champions. The average is only 2.94, and the fighter who absorbed the least per minute is Kevin Randleman at 1.12, and that one is actually a bit crazy to me considering he's fought both Bas Rutten and Chuck Liddell. Keeping on the category of defense, our average significant strike defense is 57%, with the highest being Bas Rutten at 79%. Of course, Bas Rutten did not have many UFC bouts, therefore, it's skewing things a little bit. However, the fighter with the lowest significant strike defense is Frank Mir at only 39%, and therefore our second champion punching bag. On to our next category, though, of takedowns per 15 minutes. Starting with the least, and two people share this spot with 0 takedowns per 15 minutes. These champions being Bas Rutten and John Mahal Hill. Bas Rutten I can understand because, once again, he only had like 2 or 3 bouts in the UFC, but I didn't expect to see John Mahal. Even Pereira has 0.14. Perhaps maybe an easy one to guess for the most takedowns per 15 minutes, which goes to Merab Dvalishvili with an average of 6.09 takedowns. Khabib follows that pretty closely, averaging 5.59. With Merab, though, I can in fact confirm bro throws hella takedowns. I was there for the Piotr fight. Like, oh my god, that was just insane. And the average number of takedowns per 15 minutes is 1.84. Second to last category now, with the submission average, there are actually several champions who just straight up have 0 in the statistics, so I'll put those guys up on the screen now, and I don't think there's really any surprises here. All these champions are just straight up brawlers, so, I suppose it is what it is. But this one you might have been able to guess too. The champion with the highest submission average is Charles do Bronx. The submission average across champions is only 0.611 also. And finally, bonus category time, everyone. Title defenses is going to be the bonus category for today. This is cumulative title defenses, by the way. So I know Demetrius Johnson has the most consecutive title defenses at 11, but John Jones technically does have 12 defenses across both light heavyweight and heavyweight. So just letting you guys know that. There are several champions who have 0 defenses, so I'm not going to list or show all of them, but the average number of title defenses across champions is 2, which is, actually a pretty good amount in my opinion. Anyways, the main event, what you have all been waiting for. Who is our most average UFC champion of all time? I'll be using the same method in the last video where I looked at every champ's average rank across each of these categories. So once again, to show this in Google Sheets, in the case of wins, for example, if a fighter has the most wins, he is number 1, and then the next fighter with the most wins is number 2. And that goes all the way down to 85. It may not necessarily get all the way down there to account for ties, but that's just how the ranking per category works. And once again, I take the average of each of these ranks and see who is the closest to the middle. Our middle being 43, not 42.5 because it's the midpoint between 1 and 85. So with that out of the way, our most mid champion in UFC history is Lyoto Machida. Wait, but Trevor, in the last video you tricked us and Mr. Mid also has a really low variance. I know, I did do that last time. But I actually have some news for you guys this time. Our guy Machida has the 4th lowest variance out of all of our champions. So I actually do think this is our guy. This is our Mr. Mid. Let's get into comparisons with our averages. Lyoto Machida was a light heavyweight and a middleweight who had a record of 24-8, very close to our averages across all champions. He has a very impressive resume beating BJ Penn before the UFC, Tito Ortiz, Thiago Silva for the number 1 contender spot, and then beating Rashad Evans for the belt. He had his one and only title defense against Shogun Rua before then losing it to Shogun in his next fight. He's also fought John Jones, Dan Henderson, Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold, Romero, Brunson, and that list keeps going on. And he was able to cap his UFC stint off by beating Vitor Belfort. Literally a crazy career from a guy who came before I got into following the UFC. I wish I knew more about this guy before making this video. It's just kind of crazy the things you learn about past champions and athletes when you just dive a bit deeper. Going into the numbers, Mr. Machida had 964 out of 1,810 significant strikes landed and attempted. 2.59 significant strikes landed on average per minute, only 1.57 significant strikes absorbed per minute, 62% significant strike defense, 1.21 takedowns per 15 minutes, 0.4 sub-average, and finally, 1 title defense. Literally the only categories that I would say he was kind of off on was the amount of significant strikes landed and absorbed, and honestly, I'm just in awe when I saw these numbers, just genuinely how close he came to our averages. I'm just so astounded how every single category came so remarkably close to the average. Mr. Machida, while you may not have been the most insane champion, you also weren't the worst champion. Congratulations on being the most average UFC champion of all time, Lyoto Machida. If you guys enjoyed this video and enjoy more numbery statistics with the UFC, you can check out my video on seeing who the most average UFC fighter in general of all time is, as well as an ELO engine I built like chess to determine who's the greatest fighter of all time.